Number 15. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53, I am on the rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I take home, and I notice what appeared to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, great, I'm getting pulled over, so I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared and no car drove past. Now here's where the story takes a turn for the weird, and I'm sure you guys will think I'm just making it all up because it really does seem like something straight out of a typical UFO horror movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio was randomly changing stations while the volume kept going up or down while the dome light and headlights started to flicker and turn off and back on. This was at 10:56 p.m. I start thinking to myself that the battery must be failing or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of my car. So I lean down to pop the hood so I can take a look at the battery, and that's the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night, and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around, and I saw absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field, surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I started to freak out. Where am I? Why the fuck am I asleep in the middle of a field? Where the fuck is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs which read 350 north and 50 west. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just off the main road. I started walking toward the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out. My battery had died, which struck me as odd because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car completely dumbfounded, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. After about half an hour of just sitting there, I remembered that my battery was dead. So I got on my phone and called AAA to come out and give me a jump. It took about an hour for them to get out to me since I was a good distance away from the nearest town, during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day, I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over half a mile away from my car in the middle of a cornfield more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I have only shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I'm sure people would either look at me like I'm crazy or they would call bullshit on the whole story, and I can't blame them. If someone came to me with a story like that so closely mirrors the stereotypical encounter story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. Number 14. My mom tells a story of her and her friend. Let's call her friend Lisa. When my mom and Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house, and they see a bright light in the sky. Next thing they know, the light is gone. Thing is, they think they've been on the roof for like 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours passed. Mom doesn't remember anything about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. She would answer my mom with things like, I don't know, and just drop it for a long time. So a couple of months later, Mom moves away and loses contact with Lisa for about 10 years. She finally meets with her again and immediately notices that something is odd about Lisa. Lisa appeared very distant to her, with a very dreamy demeanor, like she was really happy and at peace for no good reason. After they talk for a bit, Lisa brings up the incident on the roof. Mom says she doesn't really remember anything about it, but Lisa remembers. She remembers everything. She said at first it was all in bits and pieces and she couldn't remember any of it clearly. She was confused and scared and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more of it. She remembers it all clearly, and she remembers the other 3 times she was abducted after that clearly as well. At first, they paralyzed her somehow, and did all sorts of invasive experiments on her, but by the most recent time, they stopped probing her and began to talk with her. They didn't speak English or any other human language, but she could understand everything they said, even though she can't speak their language herself. Apparently, they told her all sorts of things, stuff about space, Earth itself, and most shockingly, predicted years beforehand that she would get pregnant in a specific year and it would be a stillborn, and that she would never be able to have children again. They told her it was not their fault, and they even made an attempt to save her from this fate, but they were unsuccessful. They had told her that they also abducted my mother, another time, after the first incident. Mom says she has no recollection of any potential abductions, but she does have recurring nightmares of being abducted, but she's almost sure that they're just nightmares. Anyway, Lisa tells Mom that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand the truth more and more. When Mom inquires what the truth is, Lisa just says, "You will know eventually." And she says once she had learned of the truth, then everything became wonderful. Mom had seen her a few more times over the years. We live in another state from her, and she apparently has a pretty normal life and doesn't obsess over alien stuff like some supposed alien abductees do. She only ever brings it up in passing, not like it's a central part of her daily life. Number 13. Okay, here it goes. The first time I had ever seen anything, I was 7 in Houston, Texas. I used to like to climb on the top of my mom's Suburban in the driveway and stare at the stars. One night, I saw an intensely bright floating light over the tree line, probably about half a mile away. I hollered, but no one came to see it. I did not see anything else until March of 2008. This experience happened between the 10th and the 15th, but I still can't give a specific date because I was up for 4 days trying to come up with some explanation to satisfy what I had seen. This was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My mother lived in a garden home community, all houses the same size, all one story, and you had great visibility distance-wise. I walked out to my buddy's place at exactly 4 a.m. to a bright starry night. When I walked out, something caught my eye to the left of me. I looked over and saw a bright blue, yellow, green, white, red, orange, strobing light floating silently to the left. I stood in awe at it and did not want to grab anyone because I didn't want to miss anything. I watched as it passed in front of the moon, behind my friend's place, and I saw the outline of the craft. It was a teardrop, sunflower seed type shape, and the craft seemed to have the lights being transmitted from the top half of it. It was almost as if it was transmitting some type of light pattern upward. It also had a dark, thin, smooth line of exhaust that disappeared 50 to 75 feet behind it. This all occurred no less than 400 yards away from me. After it passed the moon, I ran inside and grabbed someone. He saw it, but it was too far away to make out what it was. I went home, which was only a few blocks away, and looked out of the driveway. I went home, which was only a few blocks away, and looked out from the driveway, the same direction the first craft had come from. I saw 2 dim white lights slowly coming over the horizon at a slow pace heading towards me. I then ran inside and grabbed my mother out of bed. We stood there for about 20 minutes while 5 separate crafts flew over us. First came 2, then 1. About 6 or 7 minutes apart from each other, maybe going 20 miles per hour, maybe 200 feet up, completely silent. The way they looked from underneath was each one had 2 huge bright white lights, which were about 30 to 40 feet across, but they were so bright it was hard to get a good estimate. They also had a pulsating red one between the white lights that dimmed and relit. I would estimate from the size of the white lights that each craft was maybe between 150 and 200 feet wide. The last craft that flew over us flew over louder and slower than the first 4 had. Then it made a noise. It let out a sound that to this day haunts me. What I could best compare it to would be this sound, followed immediately by this sound. That's the best I could find. Take those 2 sounds, except make it digital, and multiply it by 50. This was loud. The craft did that twice. These crafts flew directly over us, and I believe that the sound was an acknowledgement. Whatever was piloting it knew we were watching it, kind of like a hello. I immediately started crying. I had no idea what I was looking at or had just heard. The second big experience I had occurred a couple of weeks later. I was standing in my driveway, smoking a cigarette, listening to my iPod somewhere around 2 a.m. I decided to pause my iPod to turn on the backlight, waved my hand over it a couple times, making somewhat of a strobe pattern. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything come up, but I got that being watched feeling. I looked up, and directly above me was a trapezoid-shaped craft with round edges that had a dark red and black pulsating glowing outline. It was like flowing electricity. It was not even 75 feet up. I could have hit this thing with a rock. I stood there while it hovered directly above me, completely silent for maybe 10 to 15 seconds, while it made this kind of motion similar to the ball that Luke trained with in Star Wars. It hovered side to side, front to back in a smooth motion, never getting more than 20 feet away from its original position. It was extremely fascinating, but I was frozen stiff. After those few seconds, I waved my hand in a friendly manner. It then changed light patterns and hovered away behind my house. Upon deeper inspection, the fact that it knew that I saw it but made no effort to evade my detection makes me think that it wanted me to follow it, although I was too freaked out to think about that at the time. I have seen the same craft on 3 other different occasions, once again in Tuscaloosa, once in Hoover, and once in Bessemer. The time I saw it in Hoover was at an apartment complex at the top of a huge hill with a great overlook. It was nighttime and I was with friends. Over the overlook, I saw a gray craft facing my direction that looked similar to the Hoth fighter. Forgive the Star Wars references. As soon as I saw it, it took off to the right silently and extremely quick. The times in Bessemer and Tuscaloosa, the trapezoid shape appeared in the sky solid white, stretched to twice its length, then the bottom shot up to the front, like it hit light speed or something. I do frequently see what I like to call streaks. They look like shooting stars, only very low, move slower, but they still have tails that stream behind them. They can also appear in many different colors. One strange story is one night when I had a dream in Tuscaloosa. In the dream, I couldn't see or hear anything, but I could feel things. I was laying on something cold, and I felt what seemed like rubber between my legs around my junk. It seemed very strange to me since a lot of people who report abductions report sperm and eggs being taken for breeding programs. The next morning, I went to let the dog out in the backyard, which is very small. To the left of the patio, there was a solid white ring in the grass that was maybe 8 to 10 feet wide. I showed my mother, and she had told me she had heard a noise that woke her the night before, but she just dismissed it. Another extremely confusing experience I had occurred in my driveway in Tuscaloosa. To give you an idea of where this occurred, look up Shelton State Community College. The house was less than a quarter mile from the campus in the Inglewood neighborhood. It was nighttime, and I heard the static that I could compare to a jet. I looked over, and directly above the community college was a light blue slit in the sky. I would say maybe 200 yards long, completely vertical, and had what looked like white electric currents coming off of both sides of it. I looked at it, and maybe 25 white things shot out of the slit to the left at one time, at a quick pace, leaving the trail behind it that I previously talked about. After they passed, the bottom of the slit went upward until the slit closed, and it made a strange sound, and then it was gone. I've had a bunch of experiences with orbs. Some solid lit that float across the sky or move in strange patterns, and some that brighten up to great intensity and then fade as they pass. After that first big experience, I started doing some research because I was so confused. I understand that I've had an abnormally large amount of experiences, and I honestly can't tell you why. I wish I could. I found a type of UFO witness called a contactee. These people are similar to abductees, except they are kept up with. I have no idea why I've had so many experiences, and I've only listed a fraction of them. My best guess would be, since I acknowledged the presence of whatever it was I was seeing, it decided to keep up with me. It's kind of a gift and a curse. There are so few people that I can talk with about it and be taken seriously. I want to seek hypnotherapy to see if there might be anything else I could uncover. I'm grateful, but still don't know much about my experiences. If you all can get anything out of what I shared, then great. Number 12. It was at night. I was woken up. Don't remember that part. I was standing in front of barely open doors. They were made partially of glass so I could see through them. I was staring at them and knew what was going to happen. He was going to visit me. Now, I couldn't tell you consciously who he was, but I felt his presence. He floated or had this strange way of walking in a fluid way. It seems like he just levitated to me. First, I could see his big white head, which had a strangely flat profile. He approached me. His face was no more than 30 centimeters from mine. He was a typical alien gray, but he was not short. I'm 185 centimeters and he was slightly higher than me. He approached me so close that I really couldn't see anything else besides his big black almond eyes. He stared at me, or through me. With each passing second, I felt like I was getting closer and closer to him. Now immediately, when he approached my face, he started doing something. I don't believe in ghosts, but what he did I can only compare to eating my soul. I felt like he took the deepest part of my very being. He started showing me things, displaying feelings to me. It was so intense I really couldn't process it consciously. It was dozens of different sensations, pictures of ending Earth. He showed me why I was insignificant. I remember hearing hundreds of souls screaming as they couldn't handle the experience. He showed me what he did to them. I wanted to turn my head from him, but I couldn't. His head was attracting my sight like a strong magnet. I could see vibrations coming from around his head. When he wasn't projecting feelings to me, he was saying something to me, or maybe communicating thoughts. It will sound strange, but he did not talk to me in a language, yet I could hear his voice. It was the most powerful thing I've ever heard, and it was inside of my head. His thoughts were so extremely well put. I've tried to fight this entry into my head, but I've never felt so overwhelmed. I can compare it to dueling a modern computer in arithmetics only using Asbestos. Now, I don't believe he was evil. What he has shown me was that we as humanity are really not worth that much. He showed me my struggles, what I care for, and then made me realize it's really insignificant. He projected to me that we are part of a bigger scheme, but we are truly redundant. They have a need for us, but it's just part of their plan, and they know many other worlds. Next thing I remember, I woke up in the morning. I've told everyone about it. I've got bad looks, but I know it was real. It was no dream. The guy was real, and he's the most powerful being I've ever met or heard about. I haven't even seen such a powerful creature in any movie. He projected omnipotence and a deep sense of knowing. What I also remember is that there were other beings like him, but they weren't really separate. They either were different avatars of him, or they formed a collective consciousness or had one purpose in mind. What I don't understand is why visit me and do these things. What purpose would that serve to anyone? It was 4 years ago, but I still remember it vividly. Number 11. I was first abducted in 1987. I was 12 years old. I say abducted, but it's not like that. Actually, you go willingly. It's scary, but it's exciting too, and they somehow make you feel okay about things. It's not until later that you feel bad or like you've been violated, and they don't do a lot of probing, like raping or anything like that. That's Hollywood nonsense. They look inside of people sometimes, but they have machines to do it. Not really machines, but it's like a room where things get done and the walls are. It's hard to explain, so just imagine that the walls are kind of like X-ray machines. That's the easiest way to describe it. Sometimes there would be others there, and they would be looking into them, or they'd put them under and cut them open, but not usually. They took tissue samples from all of us, I think, and they never put you under or give you any anesthetic or anything. They just poke you. With like those things they take samples of the ocean floor, like that, but really small. They pull out chunks of you. It's usually done on the butt or on the lower back. Mostly they just talked with me. Just questions, and they'd show me things like television shows, and they'd ask me questions about them. I think the walls measure our reaction to things too, same as they take x-rays. I don't know that, but it's a feeling I got. They never let you ask questions about what they are doing. Even once I got friendly with a few of them, they just do not like it when you ask them questions. They hate it. You can't understand their language. It just sounds like, I'm positive that we'll never be able to communicate with them in their language. I should mention that these are the grays you hear about, except they aren't gray. They are sort of beige, and they're clothed anyway. They aren't naked. I don't know if there are others. People say that they are, but I've only ever met these. Anyway, you cannot understand them, but they can understand you. And they can put thoughts into your head, but they can't hear your thoughts. You have to speak to them. They cannot hear very well, or else they are not good at understanding English, so you had to speak loudly and slowly. I don't know if they understand other languages, but I'm pretty sure they would. They're interested in all of us, and everything that goes on. They like a lot about our culture too. They like some of our music, Bluegrass is their favorite so far I've seen. They like it a lot. They love that African instrument that looks like a gourd with 13 strings. Love it. But they cannot stand horns or horn music, so they hate classical music and jazz. I think trumpets sort of sound like their language. It's a feeling that I get, but I've never been able to ask them. They've taken me up just about every 2 years, I'd say, since 1987, just about. Sometimes it's more often, and I didn't go up at all between 1995 and 2000. They usually keep me for what feels like a day, but it turns out to only be about 4 hours, usually. The longest I've stayed with them was 3 weeks. During that time, they made me make phone calls and keep up appearances. They aren't really bad, well, I was gonna say people, but they're not really bad people or whatever. The two that I've got sort of close with told me to call them Jack and Gina. I don't know if they are male or female or if they even have different sexes, but I know that those aren't their real names. Those are just names that they've told me. They will make contact with Earth on a wide scale in 2021. That's the year they'll land here or colonize or whatever. I'm not exactly sure what their plan is. They don't seem evil or dangerous. Their planet is, so they've told me, a very long way away. They couldn't explain to me how far, they said, because it was too far for me to understand, and it was also too close to the side. I have no idea what that meant, but it always stuck with me. Home is too far away for you to understand, but also close to the side. We don't have anything that they want, so they've told me. So I don't really know why they've come here, or why they've taken so many of us up, or why they've gotten to be friends with me. They don't have any religion, and they don't need oxygen or water or trees or anything. I don't think. They don't eat people. I don't think they want to breed with us or genetically engineer us. I don't know what they want, but they've been coming here for I guess at least 10 or 20,000 years. I'm not very good about history or that upper Paleolithic and all that. But they've got videos of all sorts of stuff, and they showed me videos of Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon, which were really just like us humans, except they all had black skin, way less diverse, and all sorts of other human-like things. And they've showed me videos of the pyramids being built and this huge stone building that I guess is lost somewhere or was destroyed because it was in Europe. I could tell from the video. They have video of them talking with all sorts of people all throughout the history of Earth. They showed me some of them and asked me questions about them, but I couldn't really understand any of it because I only speak English, and even English from 200 or 300 years ago is so different that I could hardly understand it. So I told them that they probably knew more about it than I did. I was up 3 weeks ago, that was the last time, and I'm pretty sure that I'll go up in a couple of years, but I'm not sure after that. The whole program or whatever they call is going to change in July 2021. I think they said 8th, but it could also be 18th. I wasn't hearing very well. They weren't trying to intimidate me or even warn me, so I don't think we have anything to worry about. I hope they don't show videos that they took of me when they first started taking me up, because I was so scared and young and they are embarrassing. Number 10. I was born and raised in a small town just outside of Topeka. My family wasn't rich and we weren't poor either. We were average. One Saturday night, me and 2 of my friends were bored to death, so we decided to go smoke some weed. Unfortunately, we didn't have a very good spot to do so we decided an old back road inside my friend's pickup truck would suffice. My best friend Greg was a master at rolling a joint. I mean, this guy was the Michael Jordan of rolling. Anyway, Greg rolled it and lit it, so by etiquette, Greg got to take the first hit. He inhaled deeply, held it in for a second, and exhaled. Smoke filled the cab of Andrew's truck. Andrew was my other friend we were with. We decided not to roll the windows down in order to hotbox. After 20 minutes, we were extremely baked. We decided we should let the cab air out and then go get some pizza, because that sounded amazing at the time. We rolled the windows down, and just as we did, a bright floodlight lit up. Greg started to freak out, and with good reason. We thought it was the cops, and none of us wanted to be arrested for drug use. Instead of driving away, we quickly talked it over and decided our best option would be for me and Greg to get out of the truck and run separate directions while Andrew drove away. On the count of 3, me and Greg jumped out and ran in opposite directions, but as soon as I stepped foot on the ground, the light turned off and it became pitch black. But I didn't stop running. I continued to run for a solid 2 minutes. I finally stopped. I was wheezing and coughing up a lot of smoke from the weed I had smoked earlier. I figured I was safe, so I pulled out my phone to check where I was on Google Maps. When I pulled out my phone, it wouldn't turn on. I knew I had charged it, but nothing was happening until I pressed the power button, so I started to walk straight. I walked for about 30 minutes until I began to hear a loud sound. It sounded like a lawnmower, only a lot smoother, without the clicks and sputters of the blades. At first I was convinced some old man was actually mowing his lawn at 12 at night because it became louder, and I began to realize it was something more malicious. The very second I realized I was in trouble, the exact floodlight I saw earlier was turned back on. At that point I knew I was screwed. The police had found me. The lawnmower-like sound persisted and grew louder, and the sky began to shine brighter. I couldn't see the source of the light. I looked all around me and up in the sky. The sound became unbearably loud, and I put my hands over my ears, but it only got louder. A sharp ringing noise rang out, and I began to get tunnel vision. I couldn't stand up anymore, and I passed out. When I woke up, I was in a pitch-black room. At first it was silent, then I heard speaking. A soft and kind-sounding voice spoke. "That's very good," the voice said. "Sit down, stand up, stay in line, no more rules." Those words are still engraved in my mind to this day, but do not haunt like the words he spoke after. His kind and soft voice turned loud and angry. "You can't understand, you just can't!" The room was still black, but my eyes were adjusting to the dark. I couldn't move from the table I was laying on, but I wasn't strapped down by anything. I turned my head to the right and saw a white glowing circle. When I looked to the left, I saw a face. No body, no head, only a face. He spoke one final time. This time, I'm sure it was directly to me. "I am the creator. You are the creation. Don't be afraid. Be aware." He spoke all of this without moving his mouth. The lights came back on and I passed out again. I tried my best to stay awake, but I couldn't. When I woke up, I was laying in an open field. The sun was just coming up. I was crying, confused, and scared. I knew no one would believe me, and I didn't believe it myself. I walked until I found a small town and used a payphone to call my friends. To this day, I haven't told anyone. My friends haven't mentioned that night since. We don't really hang out anymore, and I spend most of my days inside, afraid and alone. I can't tell anyone because they will think I'm lying, or crazy, or both. Number 9. Well, I'll tell you this story, but keep in mind I'm an atheist, so I give no credence to spiritual beings or anything of that sort. So I'm sleeping on my father's futon in his living room. We lived in a double-wide trailer. Yeah, I know, trailer park abduction stories, and that was basically my room. It was really loud outside due to the cicadas and general summertime bug noises, and I was having a really difficult time falling asleep. I felt like the AC wasn't working at all, but it's definitely blasting ice-cold air out. My room is getting warmer and warmer though. I start to sweat pretty bad, so I kick off the covers and I'm just laying there staring at the ceiling when the noise stops. I don't mean the bugs stop making noise, I mean I go deaf. I sit up and call for my dad, but I don't even hear my own voice. It's so freaking hot in this room. I start to think I should go wake my dad up, but I can't move. I'm sitting up with my back against the futon, and I want to stand up, but I'm afraid to. I'm just terrified, and I don't know why, so I sit there staring into the dark. Suddenly, I think the door opens. I can't see it, I can't hear it, but I felt it in my feet. I know what that feeling is. I'm sitting there staring into pitch black nothing, hoping that it's all in my head, that it's just a bad dream. That's when I feel it, like one giant hand wrapping over my chest and yanking me off the futon. My hearing comes back and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. My father is shaking me awake and I'm halfway outside our door. Neighbors come out, police got called, but no explanation as to what happened. I had the bruise the size of a pumpkin on my chest for a few weeks that no one could explain. To this day, I have no idea what was real or what was just a dream. I have no idea what I could have done to cause such a bruise and that fear. I've never felt the same way before or since. I just couldn't move. Anyways, that's my story. Number 8. Well, here goes. I guess I would consider myself an abductee. As a child, I had experiences of being abducted. I would lie awake in my bed all night in a state of hypervigilance, trying to observe the bedroom door, closet door, windows, and walls around me all at once until I exhausted myself to sleep. I have various memories of the little gray aliens grabbing me by the wrist to lead me around places outside of my bedroom. Wherever they took me, nothing resembling a ship or anything like that, just a plain room. Counting my spine, they would run their fingers up each vertebrae on my back. Into my child's mind, they were counting them, entering my room through the walls and so on. I'm terribly afraid of needles, and I'm always worried that the nurse is going to touch the bone of my arm with the needle. The small gray ones are as tall as toddlers, 3 feet I suppose, classic gray, large heads, big insect eyes. Their torso and limbs are very slender, and you have difficulty figuring out how they stand up and walk upright carrying that large head. Their fingers are very long, and the long fingers and eyes are the creepiest things about them. Being with them is like being in the same room as a very creepy doll or mannequin, except they move around and are alive. They have a very disturbing vibe about them. Their skin is gray and seems not to be flesh. It looks like it's made out of construction putty or something like that. They have no wrinkles or musculature. Their skin doesn't wrinkle when they move, and you can't see muscles flexing or anything like that. They don't seem to have personality or will. They are just like drones or something. I imagine that they probably stand in a closet when they are not working, but they seem to be organic. They are not machines or robots. That skin and those eyes are real skin and eyes, not a spacesuit or helmet. I also have memories of a big gray alien, perhaps 6 feet tall, who I would be brought to after the little guys were done with me. She definitely had a personality and a sense of presence about her. Her skin seemed to have more features. She wasn't just putty like the other guys. I don't know how I thought she was female, but perhaps her features were more slender. She would look into my eyes with her large eyes, and she could see all of my thoughts. I could sense her in my head. She would say things to me, clearly as an attempt to get me to believe them or to buy into them. I could recognize them as not being my thoughts, but she didn't seem to care. Trying to push against her will is like trying to push a car in neutral when it's coming down an incline. The car pushes you instead. Having her in my mind is a very disempowering experience, and I would almost liken it to rape, but I don't know what rape is really like, and I imagine it's way worse. But I'm trying to give you an idea of what it's like. It's not cool or fun at all. Someone else in your innermost sanctum, your own mind and thoughts, and you didn't invite them. You don't want them there, and they aren't just doing whatever the hell they want. Someone else in your innermost sanctum, your own mind and thoughts, and you didn't invite them. You don't want them there, and they're doing whatever the hell they want. And sometimes, she told me telepathically, don't make too much trash, or people will get sick, and stop cutting down so many trees. She also told me, we are very grateful for your help. You're a big help to us in our project, and don't tell other people about us, because they can't see us, and they will only get upset. She tried to make me feel positive about being there, but I wasn't having any of it. I only wanted them to take me back home. I had no idea where I was. It's like when you're a kid and a teacher tries to encourage you to do something for yourself that you don't want to do, like sweeping the floor or picking up after yourself. You did a great job sweeping. You're such a big help. You don't give a shit about helping the teacher, and you just want to go and play or whatever. Well, I don't care what the big one was saying. I just wanted to go home. They never told me any secrets of the universe, and I never had any hybrid or non-gray experience. They never told me any secrets of the universe, and I've never had any hybrid alien or non-gray experience. For what it's worth, I've had sleep paralysis experiences, and to me, these are different. Just like a dream is different from a nightmare, and the nightmare is different from sleep paralysis. In sleep paralysis, I have a dream or nightmare about a physical presence that is hostile or angry and is restraining me or physically accosting me. I panic for a few minutes, find that I can't move, and then I jerk myself awake. Once I'm awake, it fades away quickly, just like a nightmare becomes not so real when you wake up. With alien abductions, I don't find myself knowing that they've happened. I just wake up feeling like complete shit, maybe several days in a row, and I might have daydreams about aliens or remembering scenes from alien abduction shows. Sometimes I wake up in the early morning with the sense that they just left. I won't be able to sleep for hours, and I will be very aware and afraid of doors and windows. I'm a grown man, and when this happens, I'm not able to fall back to sleep for at least an hour. As a kid, I remember finding an alien abduction book in the library, and it was like a door had been unlocked. My mom took us to McDonald's afterwards, and I finished the book there. I couldn't put it down, and for the next 3 days, I was in shock. It was like confirmation that they were real, that other people did know about them, and that I was never really safe from them. After that, as a teenager, I got my hands on all the alien abduction books and shows I could find. They scared the shit out of me, but I had to keep reading them. I have strong opinions about depictions of gray aliens, and there are some I consider to be very accurate, with others seem like stylized interpretations by someone who has never seen them. Basically, the more realistic or human they look, with facial features such as cheeks, sternums, nose, wrinkles, and under-the-skin musculature, the less authentic they seem to me. Also, the eyes may be completely insectoid, completely around the sides, not facing forward or oval like a human's. I suppose a wasp or a mantis has the most alien-like eyes out of all the insects. There are certain cats I've seen that seem to have alien-shaped eyes. In my 20s, I started seeing a therapist. I have depression, and during some really intense sessions, I recalled memories of the aliens, the specific memories I've outlined about. I don't believe the memories were blocked or anything, I just never dared to ever recall them, because the whole thing is so terrifying. I believe it's a form of PTSD. It really does interfere with your sleep and mood. After that session, I was shaken so badly that the therapist wasn't going to release me to drive. She had to walk me through breathing exercises to get me to calm down. If I were something other than myself, I would be completely skeptical and conclude that the alien abduction experience is just another type of sleep paralysis, or that reading too many scary alien books will corrupt your mind, or that it is a cover memory for sexual abuse. But why would you dream up aliens? They're small as toddlers and frail looking. They've never touched me sexually anyways. But me having the experiences I had, I just can't believe it. Even if they devised an experiment where they could hook people up to machines and have brainwaves proving that certain types of sleep paralysis is the alien abduction phenomenon, I would still believe that they were somehow real, because the experiences feel real even after you wake up, not like a dream, nightmare, or sleep paralysis. I don't believe that aliens are organic creatures that evolved on another planet and fly here in advanced ships. The physics of faster than light travel just don't work. The only explanation I can come up with is that either they are creatures that can travel interdimensionally, perhaps they come from another dimension themselves, or exist as independent entities in human consciousness. I know both these are too crazy to really be explanations, but to me, those creatures are more than nightmares. I know that on a logical level, this is a kind of nightmare or brain disturbance, but let me tell you, the people that suffer from this really do suffer. Some people made up a name for it, post-abduction disorder. They aren't trying to say that abductions are real, but are just trying to help people that suffer from this. Of course, it's not taken very seriously, and I understand why, but I do wish sufferers could talk more freely about it, without fear of ridicule or dismissal. I know it sounds completely crazy to people who haven't suffered it. This is the most I've ever told anyone about it. I'm not interested in going to groups or anything. My suspicion is that they are convinced there's a government cover-up. I'm not interested in conspiracy theories. NumberSeven. I was once out for a fairly big night with some friends, drinking, smoked a few doobies. People started to filter off by about 2 a.m, so I walked back along the beach. It was a nice warm night, and it was about a 20-minute walk back home. I got back to my apartment, let myself in, walked into the lounge, and right at that moment it was like a switch going off in my head. 1 minute I was fine, then just blackness. I woke up in a small room, surrounded by blazing white light. It was cold, very cold, which was odd, because it was midsummer and I remember being so warm on the way home. My hands were shaking, and I could see my breath condensing when I breathed out. My clothes even looked like they had frost on them. There was a mad buzzing noise that dominated my mind. I couldn't think straight. Gradually, my eyes started to adjust to the bright light, and I could make out some shapes around me. There were containers arranged around me on shelves, some large, some small, different shapes. Most of them looked like they were made out of a translucent plastic-type material, and I could vaguely see disfigured shapes inside them. Some looked like internal organs. Some looked like they had fluids in them. Underneath me was a frosted glass door, under which there was a box-type structure, with a lettuce and a bag of carrots in it. I was completely freaking out. I thought I would never see my home again, and I was going to be experimented on by extraterrestrials for the rest of my life. I started screaming, thrashing around. My body was completely out of control. I was kicking madly against the sides of my prison, beating on the walls. Then bang, all of a sudden I'm back in my apartment, lying on the kitchen floor. I didn't experience any time travel. It was like an instant teleportation back to my home. I warmed up very quickly. I didn't feel like anything physical had happened to me. No probing or invasive surgery or anything like that. To this day, I still don't know what the fuck happened. I guess I'm more open-minded now about these sorts of things. NumberSix. My grandparents recounted their abductions to me on separate occasions, both visibly shaken and disturbed talking about it. They divorced shortly after their encounter, but both their stories stayed remarkably the same. They had gone out to drive to a friend's house out in the Cascades for a weekend, and they had seen what they thought were headlights following them for a few miles. The lights would get closer and then back up and repeat the same behavior for nearly 20 miles before my grandpa, who was a short-tempered man, pulled his car over ready to confront these people on their tailgating. Once they pulled over, they noticed the lights promptly take a sharp right and go down a steep embankment into the woods. Thinking that maybe these people had fallen asleep at the wheel and had gone into an accident, they made their own way down the embankment to help. This was in the late 1960s, so obviously no cell phones or way to communicate to emergency crews. As they get further and further down, they noticed that there were no broken branches, trees, etc., absolutely no evidence of a car falling down the embankment. And this is where they both started feeling rushed and uncomfortable in their stories. They both claimed that they hear a humming sound come up behind them, and as they turned they immediately woke up in their car 6 to 7 hours later and about 60 miles west of their friend's cabin. Neither has any recollection of how they got so far off track, and they don't remember getting back into their car, and they both felt very confused and ill. They drove themselves to the nearest hospital, and both had evidence of internal injuries that they were nearly identical to one another. 2 broken ribs, tinnitus in the right ear, and uneven pupils despite having no evidence of head trauma. That's all they told me, and then would cut off the conversation after that. It's plausible that maybe they had some sort of natural phenomena that caused a lapse in time, injuries, and general confusion, but both claim that it was something otherworldly and unexplainable, so who knows? Number 5. I can't say I truly believe that this wasn't my brain just fucking with me, but this really stood out to me because of how fucking real it felt, how awake I was. Sure was neat regardless. I was sleeping in my room, which I like to keep as dark as possible. I suddenly woke up to the sound of a loud pop, like a small firecracker, and I look out into the dark and think, oh shit, was that the electrical outlet for my computer frying? I look towards it but see nothing. I figured it was nothing, so I rolled onto my back to go back to sleep. I was very calm but pretty awake because of the little fire scare. I took a deep breath to try to hush away the small bit of adrenaline, and just as I was about to close my eyes, I saw a dark shadow above me. It seemed to be waving, and when I focused more, thinking that's odd, I realized it looked like a hand. Surprised me, and I kind of felt like it was just trying to get my attention. It straightened away from me, and then leaned and pressed down on the edge of my bed, closer to my head. It did it 2 or 3 times, and I could very clearly feel the weight. I was just sort of stunned at this point. If it was my sis or my mom, they would have said something. And when I'm nervous or scared, I tend to fall back to observation. I was pretty damn convinced that it was real at this point, but I didn't feel threatened. For whatever reason, I got the feeling that he wanted to show me that, yes, I'm really here. I saw him straighten up, and I tried to focus on the head to get a better look. It suddenly lit up. Only for a second, but the images burned forever in my memory. It's hard to describe how it looked. It was outlined in light of many colors, but it was also very faint. Greens, yellows, blues, reds, purples, all swirled together simultaneously, mixed all together yet very separate somehow. The brightness, I could relate to a glow-in-the-dark star sticker, bright enough to see very clearly, but not so bright as to make me squint. He looked a bit like a reptile, sorta akin to a raptor, but with a larger, rounder skull, a strong bow ridge, and there were circle-type bunches all over his body, which I assumed were scales. His face was turned so I saw a clear profile. It looked like he was wearing a loose, simple shirt of some kind, and he held something like a clipboard in one arm, and the other was held up to it, as if he was writing on it. But what I was looking at directly, and what I remember most of all, was his eye, that large, unforgettable eye. Circular pupil that was open somehow wide. Large colored iris, almost cartoony in how simple it looked compared to the rest of him. I guess it felt so warm and personable, but it looked a little sad, and maybe a little stern. I tried many times to draw it, but failed to get the nuance just right. The light that was outlining him flashed up so quickly and with so much detail that I felt a bit overwhelmed, and it was gone just as quickly. I hadn't tried to move or speak, so I can't say if I was able to do so. I could add even more ridiculous amounts of detail explaining this experience, but most of all I've left out is all very small and essentially meaningless. The craziest thing is that several months later, we noticed that a hawk caught a bird in our front lawn. We both thought it was really neat, so we watched it and tried to take pictures and such. When it flew back up to a tree, I watched it for a while longer, but then I saw its eye clearly, and it looked exactly like his eye. I mean fucking spot on. That weirded me out a tad, but it was still neat. For anyone vaguely curious, the eye looked most closely to this, but with a slightly heavier brow like this. I'll never forget it. Number 4. I remember going outside of my house because I could see an amazing light show through the window. It looked like red, white, and blue LED lights like the ones you get at Chuck E. Cheese, but extremely bright and lighting up my entire house. As I go outside, I see a huge, saucer-shaped craft spinning incredibly fast, but somehow I was the only one outside that night witnessing this incredible sight. I had somehow lost all my senses except my vision, because I couldn't feel or smell anything in those moments, as I was sure it was a freezing winter night, and living on a dirt road, I was used to the smell of dust in the air. Anyways, it was spinning so fast that it was somehow liquefying, but remaining perfectly intact in a saucer-like shape. I then saw a white flash of light and was somehow transported to my high school Ramada. I was living in Mexico at the time and would go to school in Arizona, so you can imagine that I just didn't sleepwalk there. I was laid out on one of the many dozen tables that were located there underneath a huge metal roof that stands on top of it. I couldn't move and I was bare-chested and was having difficulty breathing. I couldn't smell or hear or feel anything. Next to the tables is the soccer and football field, and there in the middle of the field I could see the craft had stopped spinning and was somehow grounded and not making any movement or emitting any lights anymore. Immediately after that I was surrounded by, I kid you not, what everyone recognizes as gray aliens. They were so tall and horrifying, I tried to scream, but nothing would come out. I was paralyzed with fear, but I could sense my screams inside my chest. I have never been so frightened in my life. All I recall was them surrounding me and just staring into my eyes. Those diagonal black slits that we're so used to seeing. They all had different colored uniforms that were made out of some crazy reflective material that I've never seen before. That's all I remember about that night. I then closed my eyes and found myself standing in the exact same place where I witnessed the red, white, and blue lights. I began to cry and went to sleep and never told a soul about that night. Number 3. I was about 8 years old when I had the worst nightmare of my life. I was lying in bed when a dark figure climbed through my bedroom window. I was a master of pretending to be asleep. The perks just couldn't be overlooked, missing CCD, mass, and getting carried in from long car rides and tucked in. So I did the same as I was carried through my window. It felt so surreal. At this point I realized it was a dream. Eyes still closed, I had the only sensation of ascension. I felt myself stop and opened my eyes to a dark room with reddish lights. I can't properly describe it as it was long ago, in a dreamy state, and plus it was just otherworldly. I felt a soft pinch on the back of my left hand and on the front of my right. Next thing I knew, I was back in bed with the uncontrollable urge to cry. I ran downstairs to my babysitter and just cried in her arms. She did the classic, it was just a dream, and obviously I believed it. It wasn't until next morning I noticed the scarring on the back of my left hand, as well as the noticeable metal about the size of a small ball bearing under the skin of my right palm. The next few years the metal would often cause my skin to bubble up around it, cause warts, set off metal detectors, and confound every doctor I went to. It was noticeably more irritable in places like church, airports, and next to circuit breakers. I never got it removed because I was scared of the anesthetic, and I kinda liked feeling different having it there. 5 years after the incident, the metal fell out on its own, and now my skin is just slightly grayed there. I still have the scar on my left hand, though it has shrunken considerably. Number 2. Not my story, but my dad's. As a consequence of this not being my story, I can't insist that I know what I saw and all that. All I can tell you is that I believe him, and he has no reason to lie to me. My dad has over a dozen stories like this. He grew up in rural Illinois near a woodsy area. UFO activity was apparently high back then. I don't know if it was just my family or the whole area, but my dad and grandpa would sit on the back porch and watch lights fly around their house for fun. This was a long time ago, and my dad was a kid. He's in his 60s now. They would watch the stars dart around like laser lights and laugh about it. Shit's mind-boggling to me now. I've only seen that kind of thing once or twice and it freaked me out. Besides that, a bunch of other weird shit would happen to my dad. Some of it was pretty similar to the stuff described in this thread. Actually, isolated earthquakes in Illinois that no one else felt, bright orbs floating around in the sky and floating around him, etc. It's been a while since he told me these stories, but one of the particularly weird ones has always stuck with me. FYI, I'm completely aware that it sounds like my dad was just fucking with me, and trust me, I'd prefer to believe that. But I have a good reason to trust him. For starters, he's never lied to me about anything else. He wasn't the type of person to make shit up for show. He also had absolutely nothing to gain from making the shit up. He never tried to publish it or even write it down. He would just talk about it sometimes. Anyway, so my dad was in his teens, and weird UFO shit had been happening his whole life at this point. He's out in his driveway for whatever reason, doing whatever people do when they live in a woodsy rural area. His parents aren't home, they're out shopping, at work, or whatever. Suddenly, this big black car pulls into his driveway, tinted windows, completely black. My dad just watches it pull in, not sure what to think. Something to remember here, not only is this a rural area, but it's around 50 years ago. People were a lot more trusting back then. Nowadays you'd be crazy to leave your front door unlocked, but back then it was no big deal. So this strange car pulls into my dad's driveway. It's making no noise at all, which my dad noticed right away. The door opens and out steps a super tall, fair-faced white man. He has blonde hair, an extremely well-tailored black suit, and black sunglasses on. Right away, my dad could see that there was something off about him. He looks too perfect, flawless skin, a childlike smile, and very overdressed for a hot summer day. He looks distinctly out of place. The man walks up to my dad and asks for his name. My dad, around 15 at the time, asks him why he wants to know. The man smiles and explains that he just wants to ask him a few questions and he means no harm. Bemused, my dad agrees, but he's still wary of this strange man. First, the tall white dude asks my dad if he lives here. My dad says yes, and he asks why he wants to know. The man has a completely relaxed, non-confrontational tone, and it seems almost giddy, like he was really excited to be having this conversation. His childish, overzealous grin hadn't faded in the least. He asks my dad if he had seen, felt, or heard anything that he felt was outside of the ordinary. The man just keeps grinning, and by now my dad was feeling pretty uncomfortable. He had never seen this guy before in his life. He didn't appear to be any sort of government agent. His behavior was far too unusual. Suddenly, the man's demeanor completely changes. His grin disappears and he looks worried. Without so much as a goodbye, he opens his car door, gets inside, and drives away, still making no noise at all. A couple minutes later, my dad's parents come back from shopping. Now for the really weird part. My mom saw the same fucking dude 30 fucking years later. She was in a bookstore looking to buy something, don't know the details really, when she turned around and noticed this tall, fair-looking blonde guy in a black suit sitting at a table in the cafe, 30 feet or so from my mom. He was reading a newspaper. Sitting across from him was this other dude, dressed exactly the same as the blonde one. They still looked strangely out of place, somehow too perfect, too clean. Now my mom had heard this story from my dad before, and she actually recognizes my dad's description of the man. He definitely stood out. So she's kind of taken aback, trying to figure out if it's actually the man my dad had seen all those years ago. The blonde guy notices my mom looking at him. Again, his demeanor completely changes. He stands up, turns around, and quickly walks out of the bookstore with the second guy right behind him. What the fuck, right? I'm actually freaking out a bit thinking about this. I'm 22 now, and I have to wonder if I'm going to be running into this awkward blonde stranger. It's like the men in black sent their most inept agent to follow around my dad. Or the most obvious alien ever is trying to study my family in our natural habitat. I don't fucking know. I know this is all very vague. I'm gonna bring it up to my dad tonight to try to clarify a few details. I'll be honest, I've pushed this story out of my head because it weirds me out. Number 1. Well, this is an interesting story, I guess. Maybe some of you will enjoy it, although I'm gonna try to summarize. For 3 nights, strange things happened. The first night I was reading, and I remember a particular sensation wrapping around the top of my head and traveling down my neck. I've never had anything like this occur to me. It was like a static massage, and I took note. It almost scared me. I soon went to bed, yet was awoken in the middle of the night at the same point. I was on my back and looking at my window. I remember I was hallucinating extremely bad. The window was morphing and innumerable colors were present. I remember thinking at this time 2 things. First, I was absolutely awake. Second, although delirious, I recalled that these hallucinations were normal, and I was glad to be greeted by them, because they happen every night. When I woke up the next morning, I had a startling realization that I don't actually hallucinate every night, and couldn't wrap my head around the fact that it seemed so normal at the time. The second night, the exact same thing happens. Strange sensation on my head. I go to sleep. I awake tripping. This time I'm on my stomach looking towards the lights on my computer tower on the floor. There were symbols emanating from the colors of those blue and orange lights, and I was visibly tripping. Again, I was comforted by the thought that this was normal, and awoke to consider how particular it was to think this. Again, I was comforted by the thought that this was normal, and awoke to consider how particular it was to think it was. The third night I will never forget. It fucking changed my life. I remember waking up to an extremely vivid image of 3 beings hovering in front of me. Their skin was gray, heads large, and bodies much taller than the normal stature of a human. There was rocky earth beneath us, lit quite well possibly by an extremely starry sky above me, yet no other visible light source. This image flashed in front of my eyes for a split second, and then I was looking at the blackness of my closed eyelids. I then became aware of the most incredible sensation I have ever felt. Although I could feel myself localized in my body, there was an expanse. Words will never do this justice, as I fear it was too much of a subjective experience. In my description, I can only describe it as an introverted intuition. The best analogy I can make is with attaining nirvana in a Buddhist sense. I felt connected with everything in the world, and had never had such strange experiences to my knowledge since. I became compelled to understand what happened to me. I am an academic, so my research brought me to areas within one hemisphere of my brain screamed pseudoscience. At the other, more open and inquisitive side, the truths of my hemispheres of thought almost became relegated to the single truth I could fully agree upon. I know nothing, and therefore anything is possible. Over a few years, I found answers that made me content at night, yet unfortunately batshit crazy to anyone I would consider talking to about this. I began researching past life regressions. No, not everyone was Abe Lincoln or Cleopatra in their last lives. Channeling abductions, transmediation, and astral projection. First, I found that through one channeled experiment, a researcher, if you call her that, asked a supposed entity what it was like in a higher dimension, and it was replied that it was like a shamanic experience, like you were tripping. Second, through another book on channeling, an extremely advanced race was contacted, and they were asked how they can contact individuals on Earth. It was suggested that not all abductions are physical encounters, and not all abductions or otherwise are bad. I now consider my experience took place in a dream state, and that it was a damn good experience. Apparently, this group of extraterrestrials, if I am to consider the validity of this text, contacts individuals to guide their purpose in life, as they are not originally of Earth origin. Well, fuck. This makes sense to me, I suppose. I know something extreme happened to me in those 3 nights. I am reminded of the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, and I wonder when the scientific actualization of our race will further fuck with our paradigms. Maybe that movie will become classic science fact. Got an idea for a top 15 list? Submit it at top15s.net/submit. Be sure to subscribe for future videos. Thanks for watching.